Our story begins in the cold hush of the western frontier, where silence is a language and survival is a promise you whisper only to yourself. It was there, beneath torn canvas and fading embers, that a single choice lit the path toward something bigger than loneliness. One gesture, small enough to ignore, easy enough to walk past, turned into a home, a life, and a reason to stay. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The wind had been howling through the canyon for hours. It shoved itself between the stone walls, yanking at the canvas edges of Boone Reddick's tent, whistling through mesquite brush and brittle limbs outside. The fire from earlier had burned down to nothing, just a shallow glow of embers beneath a collapsed rack of sticks. The pot of beans beside them had long since gone cold. The fading glow barely cast light against the canvas walls. Boone sat fixed against the back pole, hat tipped low, shoulders tucked deep into his coat. His Henry rifle rested across his legs, barrel angled toward the tent opening. He wasn't tense, but he sure wasn't easing into comfort either. A man doesn't roam alone through 4 winters and forget how to stay guarded. Years earlier, he'd walked away from the Carter Patrol and never looked back. No barracks, no orders, just miles of trail, trading hides, breaking mules, showing up in town only when he needed bullets or beans. What he carried from the campaigns still spoiled inside him like meat gone wrong. The villages they torched, the voices that wouldn't quit screaming even after silence fell over the ash. He remembered standing in line, rifle steady, acting like he wasn't watching the very hell he helped keep in place. Out here, he didn't owe answers to anyone. He didn't have to speak if he didn't want to. That quiet was all he had left. He was chewing the last of a stale biscuit when the tent flap jerked. Not loud, just one hard pull of wind and a hand. Boone snapped awake, tightening his grip on the rifle but not shifting otherwise. Habit taught him to wait. One breath, another. Then a shadow stooped through the flap. Small frame, pausing, then stepping inside. The ember light caught her legs first, bare, scraped up, dust ground into the skin. Then the crooked blanket hanging from her shoulders, burned along one edge, stained in ash. Her long black hair stuck to her cheeks like sweat had dried over tears. She was trembling, though she tried to hide it. Boone didn't lower the gun. She didn't cry, didn't plead, didn't even excuse herself. She just crouched halfway, clutching that blanket as though it was the only thing still hers. Her eyes were wide, dry, not broken, but tired enough to show she had already braced herself for pain, and she had nowhere else to go. Boone spoke low, flat. "You alone?" She gave the faintest nod, chin quivering. "Fire's out," he muttered. "You bring any with you?" Still no words. Her gaze dropped, maybe embarrassed, maybe frozen from cold, maybe both. Boone lowered the rifle but kept it within reach. He reached behind him, pulled his spare wool blanket, thin, edges frayed, but warmer than whatever she held. He offered it out. She didn't come closer. She didn't lift a hand, just stared at his. Her legs were shaking now, from cold or from holding herself upright too long. So he dropped the blanket at her feet. After a moment she crouched, knees giving way slightly, and picked it up. The sound she let out was part pain, part relief. She sat at the far edge of the fire pit, cross-legged, facing downward, wrapping both blankets around herself. The flap closed again. He didn't speak. Neither did she. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was tight, but not enough to break. Boone watched her through what little firelight remained. She was clearly clan red sky. The face, the posture, the small, quick breaths. You learn to notice those things. She looked young. Mid-20s, perhaps. Thin but tough. bones built from winters, not softness. He noticed her feet, split at the edges, bleeding open. She had walked a long stretch barefoot. That meant she'd been desperate, or hunted, or both. He turned towards the embers and stared at them until heat stopped glowing. She didn't sleep at first. She sat upright, shoulders tense, flinching whenever the last stick snapped. One hand stayed tucked beneath the blanket edge. Probably a knife. Good. Someone with a weapon was someone who hadn't surrendered completely. When she finally gave in to exhaustion, her sleep was thin, like a child forced to stay alert. She curled tight, pulled her knees close, jaw clenched, shoulders trembling beneath both blankets. She did not turn her back to him. Not once. Boone didn't close his eyes either. His mind rolled like loose stones. Why this tent? Why tonight? Why him? He wondered if this was the war catching up, not with gunfire, but with people. Toward morning, the embers went dull. He tossed 2 sticks on. She shifted in her sleep. The blanket slid from her shoulder, and he saw a dark bruise stretching across her collarbone. Boone's jaw tightened. He didn't look away. She didn't move at first. Dawn crept in slow, pale light, drifting through the mist hanging over the canyon. When Boone finally stood, stretching the stiffness from his back with a low grunt, the girl jolted awake, body snapping upright, eyes wide, alert like she'd been chased across half the desert. "Easy," he murmured, voice gravel light. "Just stalking the fire." She didn't answer, but she didn't bolt either. That was something. Boone pushed outside, into wind that cut cold enough to sting the teeth. He slid on his gloves, pulled the scarf higher along his jaw, and walked toward the tethered mules. Behind him, he heard the tent flap shift, but it never opened. She stayed inside. That was enough for now. By midday, the haze thinned enough for weak sunlight to lay across the canyon floor. Boone knelt beside the fire pit, coaxing flame back from scraps of dry twig and a strip of mule dung. He'd already hauled creek water and soaked beans. Behind him, the girl finally stepped out, slow as if stepping would break something. She was still wrapped in the same wool, though now her feet were bound in rough canvas he'd left near the door, his half-finished attempt at shoes. She hadn't asked permission. She simply used them. That told him plenty. She warmed her hands above the fire, silent, eyes lowered like she wasn't sure she deserved warmth. Boone didn't prod her for talk. Didn't need to. He passed her a tin cup filled with thin wheat coffee. She hesitated, then held it with both hands and drank slow, careful, wasting nothing. No thank you. But she didn't refuse it either. He watched how she moved, how she cradled the cup as though it might vanish, how her eyes flicked toward his rifle resting against a cut stump, how her shoulders tightened when wind kicked dust sideways. She knew danger, that was clear. But she hadn't run. Not in the night, not at first light. That meant more than words could. "You got a name?" he asked. She didn't lift her head. But after a moment, her lips shaped a quiet word. "Suri." Boone nodded once. He didn't make her repeat it. Names belonged to a person's past. No sense ripping them open. He didn't ask more. He knew better than to pull history from someone who barely trusted the air around him. But he read the signs. She was young, maybe 24, maybe younger, but her eyes carried weight far older than her face. That kind of heaviness didn't come from walking miles. It came from being pushed away. He studied the canyon walls. No tracks, no traders, no Carter patrol riding through. If her camp had been torn apart, it wasn't recent, and if someone hunted her, she wouldn't be sleeping like she had. She wasn't fleeing anymore, just drifting. Alone. After breakfast, Boone said he needed to check the traps. She followed, not beside him, but behind, matching distance like a stray mule not sure it belonged. He noticed first by gravel shifting, then by her shadow sliding when the sun moved. When he crouched near a snare, she sank down too. Not close, not touching, but near enough to watch. One trap held a jackrabbit, another was sprung and empty. He reset both. At the third snare, she motioned for his knife. Boone looked at her hand. Slender fingers, calloused palms, scars crossing her wrist like thin white threads. Not soft, not untested. He passed the blade. She knelt, cleaned the wire, skinned the hair swiftly, wrapped the meat in a strip of canvas, then gave the knife back. For the first time, her eyes met his, steady, weighing him like a man sized against danger. Not thanks, not fear, just judgment. Back at camp, she stretched the hide on rock to dry. No directions needed. Boone worked on patching his coat while she cleaned the meat. Halfway through stitching, the needle snapped. He swore low, dropped the fabric, and dug through his kit. Before he found anything, she slid the coat into her lap. From somewhere under her own blanket, she drew a small bone needle, one clearly used often, threaded it with fiber unwound from her hem, and mended the seam with tighter, neater stitches than his hand could manage. She didn't ask. She simply fixed it. Boone didn't stop her. Night brought a sharp chill. She roasted the rabbit with wild onions he'd gathered earlier. They ate without speaking. Firelight threw shifting gold against the tent walls. She never touched his rifle. And he didn't ask where she'd come from. After they finished, Boone fed the mules, checked the surroundings, and returned. She pointed upward toward the dark ridge. "Storm coming," she murmured. He lifted his gaze. Clouds were stacking in low sheets, wind climbing colder. Snow would hold them for days. He tossed 2 fresh logs on the fire and ducked into the tent. She followed close, crouching beneath the flap, wrapped tight again, sitting near the pit, heat against her face, blankets drawn to her throat. She made no sound, but she stayed. And that was enough. Her legs folded in tight, eyes dimming with exhaustion. Boone shrugged off his coat and boots, laid his rifle within reach, and sank back against the rear pole of the tent. Words didn't pass between them, but when the wind pressed hard against the canvas and the seams groaned like timber under strain, she shifted closer. Not enough to touch him, just enough to borrow the warmth radiating off his shoulder. When a sudden gust slapped the flap hard, she flinched, then steadied herself. Boone remained still, letting her choose whatever distance felt safe. He wasn't there to draw lines for her. When the embers thinned, and only a faint red hush glowed between them, she lay on her side, cheek resting on her arm, eyelids drifting low. Just before sleep pulled her under, she whispered, barely louder than breath, "Why didn't you touch me that first night?" Boone stared at the coals, jaw tight. The silence held a moment before he answered, voice quiet as wind in sagebrush. "Because you didn't want me to." She didn't reply, just exhaled, slow and sure, and let her eyes fall closed. Something settled between them then. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of something close enough to matter. And for the first time in years, Boone allowed himself to close his eyes while another soul lay awake nearby, because he knew she wouldn't run now. Not this night. Not anymore. The storm came heavy in the early dark. Not snow like Suri warned, but sleet, biting cold, hammering the canvas roof until mud rose thick and red outside. Wind shoved so hard against the walls that the tent swayed like an old barn about to fold. Inside, their breath fogged the air. Surrey curled into a tight bundle beside the fire pit, both blankets wrapped tight. Boone fed the coals 3 different times just to keep frost from creeping into their bones. He barely slept. Even when his eyes closed, instinct stayed wide awake. Every gust made him reach for the rifle out of habit, not because he feared someone prowling outside, but because years inside the Carter Patrol had burned that reflex into him. By first light, the ground outside had churned into mud thick as paste. One of the mules had chewed through its tether and wandered uphill. Boone tracked the prints, swore low beneath his breath, and spent near 2 hours coaxing the stubborn animal back down through the freezing muck. Mud clung heavy to his boots when he stepped into camp again. Surrey had boiled water and was soaking herbs, steam drifting up in pale wisps. He didn't ask where she had gathered anything. He hadn't seen her leave camp. She must have carried them days ago, packed away like pieces of her last belonging. She held the tin cup toward him. He took it. The taste was sharp and bitter, but spread heat down his chest. He drank every drop. Then he set to sharpening his snares, replacing bent wire. She watched a moment, rubbing warmth back into her hands, then quietly reached for a strip of rawhide cord and began repairing a snare he hadn't touched yet. Boone paused, glanced her way, then went back to the task. Talking wasn't necessary. Some bonds didn't open with words. By afternoon, the storm moved on, leaving slick rock, wet air, and silence. Boone considered packing up, moving south toward winter roots near Dragoon Pass. But something held him. Maybe it was the way Surrey stitched his coat without being asked. Maybe the way she stirred beans just enough to keep them from burning. Maybe the quiet weight of someone choosing to remain. Little things. But they weren't small. That evening she finally spoke truth. They sat by the fire. Boone was trimming a rabbit, clearing sinew, while Surrey crushed soaked pods into a paste using the flat of a tin can. Her voice came quiet, brittle in spots. My people say I bring misfortune. Boone didn't raise his eyes, but his hands stilled. They said the sickness came because I stayed when the child died. They blamed the storm, the horses running off, empty traps, called me cursed. She paused. Boone listened in the flames. They left me in the dry hills, no shoes, no food. Her voice cracked. They took my brother, said he'd survive better without me. Boone set the knife aside. How old is he? 7. He nodded once. You know where he is now? No, she whispered. Maybe a mission near the trading post. They said the priest there takes in children. Boone let that hang. He didn't offer soft comfort. He didn't know how. But he looked at her for the first time with full attention and saw something different than fear or grief. Something stubborn. Something still alive. That night she didn't curl tight and small. She lay beside him, under the same blanket, her back against his chest, not touching, but near enough that he felt her breathe. Slow, steady. For the first time, she didn't flinch at the fire popping or the wind striking the canvas. Boone stayed awake long after. Staring upward, thoughts pacing. He pictured a mission at the edge of a trade road. Pictured the kind of men who ran such places. Pictured a boy left behind. And somehow, without speaking it aloud, he knew where the trail was pulling them next. Boone had ridden through that stretch once months earlier, a whitewashed mission house with a fading cross leaning crooked above its doorway, children shaved clean and staring hollow like livestock waiting on feed. He remembered Reverend Calder's voice being too polished, too smooth, And the way he eyed boys from the clan red sky like they were stray pups someone ought to break. Boone hadn't liked the man then. He liked the thought of him even less now. He didn't say it aloud. He didn't need to. A decision had already settled in him. If the boy was there, Boone would bring him out. Not to pay back sins, not to wash away old ghosts, just because it was the right damn deed to do. At first light, he handed Suri a pair of heavy wool socks and told her to pack small. They headed out after breakfast. She watched him for a long moment, not questioning, not fearful, just seeing who he was when a choice had already hardened inside him. Then she nodded, not a frightened wanderer anymore, not a guest borrowing a corner of warmth, a woman walking beside him. Maybe by the time the trail ended, they would be something that resembled family, not born of blood, but held together by staying. They tore down camp before the sun climbed the ridge. Boone wasn't a man who talked unnecessary words. His silence carried direction. His movements didn't drift. They declared intent. When Boone decided something, it stopped moving. He packed only what mattered. Beans dried stiff, coffee ground coarse, a sleeping roll, flint, the traps he'd hastily reset, his rifle, and the last of that rabbit meat wrapped in canvas. Suri rolled up the tent fabric tight and secured it with rope, while Boone cinched the packs onto the mules. She didn't ask where they were headed. She didn't need to. Boone's silence had already told her. They took the faint trail south, though it wasn't much more than a ghost of hoofprints swallowed by brush and stone. Stormwater slicked the rocks beneath her feet, but she kept pace. Boone led the mules on a steady climb. Suri followed close, moccasins too large, but not a word of complaint. By mid-morning the sky peeled open, sunlight sharp through the chilly air, carving long shadows beneath the canyon walls. Hawks drifted overhead in slow spirals. Boone halted once, listening, then veered west off the trail. They crossed a dry wash, then climbed a low rise to skirt a fallen cottonwood. When they reached the top, country opened wide in every direction. Flat basin stretching south, dotted with distant cottonwoods, and one small smoke column leaning skyward near the horizon. The mission. They didn't speak of it. Not yet. But the weight of it rode along with them. By sundown, they reached an old line shack, half caved but still dry. Boone tied the mules to a gnarled root jutting from the earth and built a fire using boards peeled from the half-fallen roof. Suri unpacked the food and tools, while Boone worked the last bit of snare wire between his palms. When flames climbed strong, she sat near them, legs folded beneath her, something softer showing in her face for the first time in many days. "Why do you help me?" she asked. Not meek, not pleading, just straight. Boone didn't answer right off. He ran his fingers along the stock of his Henry, tracing a crack worn deep into the grain. "You help people," she said, like she wasn't entirely convinced. He looked toward the firelight, not at her. "It wasn't like that the first night." "I know." Boone's jaw tightened. "I've slept beside enough strangers to tell the difference between someone asking for shelter and someone expecting to be taken." He said it without heat. Just truth. "You never took anything from me," she whispered. "You still don't." Boone shrugged. "Don't mean I'm a good man?" "You ain't bad," she replied, steady as land beneath boots. He said nothing more, just kept cleaning the rifle. Later, after supper, she opened a small cloth bundle from her satchel. Inside lay a carved bone token, smooth, aged, marked with a simple sign belonging to the clan Red Sky. "My brother carved this before they took him," she said. "If Reverend Calder still keeps him there, he'll know this." Boone turned it over between his fingers. A circle split at the top, like wings leaving ground. A hawk cry. He nodded once and slipped it into his pocket. That night, as fire dimmed low, she sat nearer than before. Not close enough to touch, but close enough for her breathing to be heard steady against the night. When Boone pulled the blanket over them both, she rested her head against his shoulder. Neither spoke. The quiet held a shape now. No urgency. No bargain. Just two people walking the same trail without saying so. By morning they were moving again. The land softened as they neared the mission grounds, sagebrush giving way to wagon ruts carved long ago, a fenced stretch worn gray by storms. Voices carried, children laughing somewhere beyond the low rise. Boone slowed. Suri's face tightened, fingers clutching the edge of her dress. "We go in together," she murmured. Boone glanced at her. "We do, and if he tries to take me, tries to keep me there—" "He won't," Boone said, firm as iron striking stone. Final enough that the wind didn't question it. They reached the mission grounds just as the bell rang for midday rations. The courtyard was alive with noise. Thin-faced boys being prodded along by an older woman snapping a willow switch, a drunken trader slumped beneath his wagon tongue, and Reverend Calder standing near the well, coat sleeves rolled, greeting a townsman with polished satisfaction. Boone stepped forward at an easy, deliberate pace. His rifle hung across his back where anyone could see it. His boots struck the hard-packed dirt with slow certainty. Reverend Calder turned. Younger than Boone remembered, hair slicked neat, fresh coat, a smile practiced enough that it died long before reaching his eyes. "Can I help you, friend?" the man asked, gentle as syrup. "I'm looking for a boy," Boone said. "Clan Red Sky. Name's Jace. About 7. Might have been brought through here weeks back." Calder's brow lifted lightly. "We take in many abandoned souls. I'll need to check the records." Suri stepped forward then. She didn't speak. She simply held up the bone token. A flicker crossed Calder's face. He covered it quickly, forcing a pleasant curve back onto his lips. "Ah, yes. That one. He's here." Boone's jaw tightened. "Bring him." "Perhaps we could speak in my office," Calder began. "No," Boone said, voice flat as a board-side canyon wall. There was weight in the way he said it. Cold, final, and the kind that draws a pause whether a man wants to stop or not. Calder swallowed, turned, and called out. Moments later, a small boy emerged with Miss Edna guiding him by the shoulder. His hair had been clipped down to nothing, his clothing washed but hanging loose like borrowed fabric. But his face was Suri's face, same sharp jawline, same dark eyes that held too much silence. The moment he recognized her, his whole body froze, then broke loose. He ran. Suri dropped to her knees and caught him mid-stride. He sobbed, not loud, just broken breath pressed into her shoulder. Suri cried too. Quiet, trembling, relief shaking through her arms. Boone turned away to give them room. Reverend Calder cleared his throat. "You can't simply take him. There are guardianship forms, responsibility transfers." Boone turned back, stepped one measured step closer. "He's not yours," Boone said. "And he isn't yours either," Calder snapped. Boone didn't reply. He reached into his coat and unfolded a thin document. He pressed it into Calder's hand. The priest unfolded it. A formal protective transport order from the Southern District Quartermaster, issued back when Boone rode with the Carter Patrol. It granted standing authority to relocate tribal minors when safety or well-being was questioned. It wasn't custody, but it was power. Enough that Calder stepped back. "Fine," he muttered, "but he becomes your burden now." Boone didn't answer. He just turned and walked toward the gate. Suri followed behind, Jace clinging to her, clutching the bone token. No one spoke until the mission walls fell behind them. Then Suri exhaled sharply and whispered, "You didn't have to do that." "Yeah," Boone said, still walking. "I did. Because the past doesn't repair itself. Somebody has to step in and make something different." The air changed once they left the mission. Quiet, settling like dust over prairie grass. Jace stopped crying, but stayed pressed into Suri's side like a vine reclaimed its tree. One hand knotted into her dress, the other still gripping the carved token. Boone walked slightly ahead, scanning horizon lines, a habit too deep to shake. His thoughts churned like old boots through gravel. He kept seeing Calder's eyes, thick with false charity and thin with fear. He knew that kind of man, one who stitched control beneath the mask of salvation. That boy hadn't only been kept, he had been reshaped, hair shaved, words stripped, clothes starched, spirit bent. They made camp before sunset beside a dry arroyo tangled with mesquite. Boone built shelter from canvas strung across the mules and weighted by rocks. Suri worked the beans in the pot while Boone circled out, setting snares. He didn't expect to catch anything, but routine steadied him. When he returned, Jace sat across from Suri, knees pulled tight to his chest. "Is he always that quiet?" Boone asked. Suri glanced at her brother. "He used to talk. He'll find it again. He remember you?" She nodded. "They told him I was dead." Boone didn't answer that. He poured coffee, let the bitterness settle. Jace stared at him, unblinking. After a moment, the boy rasped, "Are you the soldier?" Boone looked at him fully. Suri stiffened, waiting. "Was," Boone said. "Not anymore." The boy didn't reply. His gaze drifted toward Boone's rifle. "You frightened of me?" Boone asked plainly. Jace didn't speak, but he leaned closer into Suri's side. She rested her hand gently on his head. "He doesn't need to be afraid," she whispered. "You didn't hurt anyone today. You did the opposite." Boone didn't know how to hold that kind of truth, so he just stared into the fire, letting the warmth crackle against the dark. So Boone only gave a single nod and stirred the coals with a slow hand. After the meal, Suri brushed dirt from Jace's feet, wiping the soles clean with the edge of her blanket. Boone watched the gentleness in her touch, the patience, and the way the boy leaned into her as if he finally remembered what safe felt like. When Jace drifted asleep, curled against her under the blanket, Suri lifted her eyes. "You could have walked away," she murmured. Boone didn't pretend he misunderstood. "I could have." "But you didn't." He prodded the fire, sparks lifting and fading. "Sometimes walking off leaves worse prints behind," he said. She studied him a long moment, the flames catching soft in her eyes. "You've done things," she whispered. He didn't respond right away. "Things I don't talk about," Boone finally said. "I know what kind," she replied. "Not blame, just fact. I saw the Carter Patrol burn a grain shed, shot a man when he ran back inside for food. I was hiding behind the woodpile. I was 8. Boone looked at her, not out of pity, but recognizing himself in what she carried. "I was there," he said quietly. "Not that one, but others." Suri gave the smallest nod. "You didn't have to say it." "I did," Boone answered. She shifted, inching closer so their knees nearly touched. "My people said what happened to me was punishment," she whispered. "They said surviving meant the spirits turned away, that I should have died like the others." Boone watched firelight wash over her face. "That why they left you?" Suri looked down. "They said I carried the shadow of the dead." Silence followed, but it wasn't the kind that isolates. It was shared hurt resting in the same place. "You don't carry death," Boone said simply. "You carry your own weight, same as I do." Her eyes lifted, holding his without flinching. Then slowly she reached out, not grabbing, not asking, but touching the edge of his sleeve with her fingers. "You think we can make something here?" she breathed. "After what we both are?" "We already are," Boone said. "We just haven't said it out loud yet." That night, she curled beside him again. Not for warmth. He didn't pull her close, didn't lay claim, but he didn't move away either. Her breath warmed his chest, her hand resting near his collarbone. Outside, canyon wind died still. Jace didn't cry, not even in sleep. And Boone, for the first time in years, closed his eyes without dreaming of flames. They rode slow at dawn, not because of danger, but because none of them named a destination. There wasn't urgency now. The boy was with them, safe. His small hands clutched Suri's belt as he rode behind her, cheek leaning against her spine. Boone walked beside them, leading the mule, Henry rifle over his back. His boots stirred dust in the narrow gulch they crossed, same ridge he'd once traveled alone. It didn't look empty now. They stopped beneath a sandstone ledge before sundown, the wind breaking clean overhead. Boone knew the place. Dry ground, rock encircling a shallow fire hollow. He cleared it out while Suri unpacked. Jace gathered twigs without being asked. He still barely spoke, but he obeyed, watched, stayed close, learning the rhythm of belonging. After supper, Suri fished out the rabbit bones and passed Boone his portion. He nodded, noticing how steady her hands had become. Work no longer born from desperation, but routine. Life. Silence drifted until Suri asked, "Why here? This canyon?" Boone wiped his hands on ragged cloth and tossed bones into the flames. "It's quiet," he said. "Doesn't demand anything from a man. And folks only come through here when they're looking for something that ain't easy to find." She held his gaze. "And what were you looking for?" Boone stared into firelight a while before answering. "A place where I didn't have to answer for my past anymore." Suri didn't soften it with comfort. She didn't turn away. "That's what I was looking for too," she whispered. When Jace fell asleep, feet tucked beneath the saddlebag, Boone sat sharpening his blade while Suri braided her hair down one shoulder. First time she'd done that openly. Before, her hair had hung tangled, unkept, like someone not sure tomorrow would exist. She watched him and spoke again, voice smaller now. "You still carry it, the war, what you did." Boone didn't look up. "It's not something you put down," he said. "Not all the way. Then what do you do with it?" "I try not to be that man anymore. I can't undo what I did, but I can keep it from happening again." Suri nodded, slow and honest. "You already have." Boone looked up. Her words found the part of him he had not trusted belonged to anyone anymore. "You saying that matters?" he said. And for the first time, the firelight didn't feel like judgment. It felt like direction. Suri reached into the pouch tied at her hip, pulled out a small bone needle and a strand of thread she had unraveled from her own blanket. "Your coat is still splitting at the elbow," she said quietly. Boone shrugged like it wasn't worth mentioning, but handed it over. She took it gently, thumb brushing the worn edge, and began stitching without a word. The fire cracked, flicking sparks into the dark like stars that burned out too quick. When she finished, she folded the coat neatly and held it toward him, though she didn't release it just yet. "I know you didn't ask for any of this," she said. "Me, Jace, all of it." Boone didn't pretend indifference. "I didn't ask for a lot of things," he answered. Doesn't mean I don't want them now." Her eyes held steady on his, calm, unguarded, searching. It was the closest she had ever come to asking him anything. Boone slid closer, closing that small gap. Not crowding, just near enough to be chosen. Suri didn't pull away. Her hand remained on the coat between them, her fingertips brushing against his knuckles. Boone let silence speak first, then said low, "If you stay, I'll build something better than canvas and coals. I'll raise walls. Put a roof over both of you. Make it hold." Suri lifted her chin slightly. "And if I stay, I cook each morning. I mix medicine when Jace coughs, and I sleep beside you because I choose it." His breath eased out slow, eyes still locked on hers. "Then I want you to," he said. Suri nodded once, leaned forward, and rested her forehead against his shoulder. Her hair fell across his chest, soft against his shirt. Boone didn't move, just let her stay there as long as she needed. Outside, the wind shifted and softened, desert air settling into a quiet that wasn't empty, just watching. Later, when they lay down, Suri curled into him again, not driven by cold this time. One arm crossed his ribs, her hand rested above his heart. Jace, half asleep, pressed close beside them, one hand resting on Boone's boot like a child claiming a safe patch of earth. That night, there was nothing worth running from. Nowhere else to be. The next morning, they moved deeper along the canyon path. The trail thinned between sandstone slopes, tracked through clusters of sage and rabbit prints. Boone knew a place, an abandoned line station tucked beneath a rock embankment, forgotten once cavalry scouts quit passing through. The roof was half fallen, logs scattered, but the stone foundation held. A spring ran close. Deadwood for fires lay everywhere. He had slept there once, alone, between marches and orders. Now he came back with something different in mind. He stopped the mule at the ridge and looked down over the clearing. Suri stepped beside him, Jace holding her hand. The boy had softened, speaking in light whispers to his sister, even answering Boone in short nods. Yet he stayed glued to his sister's side, never straying. Suri followed Boone's gaze toward the broken foundation. "This is where you want to build?" He nodded. "Enough stone left to stand a wall. Roof will take time, but it's a start." She didn't question. No hesitation. "Then we will need to dry meat while the weather holds," she said. That was all. No speeches, just shared work. They unpacked by noon. Jace carried stones and lined them into a cooking ring. Suri rigged the remaining canvas into shade, while Boone dug into the ground where a root cellar would hold. They labored until dusk. No wasted motion, no complaints. Every task held meaning. By the end of the second day, upright logs stood braced against stone. Suri boiled sinew strips to bind beams. Jace pressed clay into cracks to shut out wind. Boone worked till his palms bled raw. That night, they sat near the fire, watching orange shadows dance across half-built walls. "Does this feel like home?" Suri asked, brushing wood splinters from her skirt. Boone didn't answer quick. "Feels like a place that could become one," he said. "Better than canvas," she murmured. He nodded. "Better than running." Jace had fallen asleep near the wall, wrapped tight in wool, his head resting on a sack of beans. Suri shifted closer, arms folded, warmth rising from the stones. "You know," she whispered, "when I was young, they told me a person never belongs to land unless born on it. But now I think belonging is something you build, not something you're given." Boone reached for her hand. She let him. They sat with their backs against the new wall, fingers threaded, watching stars blink awake overhead. Canyon wind eased. The earth breathed soft. Come daybreak, Boone found Jace stacking stones into a little circle, building something he called a chimney, twigs balanced like ladders. Boone crouched beside him. "This ours now?" the boy asked. Boone watched his hands place one last flat rock. "It will be if we keep working at it." Suri stepped up holding a basket of onions and wild pods. "Then we'd better not stop." By week's end, 4 walls stood, and nothing about it felt temporary anymore. There was no door just yet, but the wind didn't cut through the place anymore. Inside, they had a space to lie down, a corner for food, and a little spot where Jace had arranged 2 stones and a stick, like it might someday be a real table. That night, the boy asked if he could sleep closer to Boone, not because he was afraid, but because he finally felt safe. Suri watched him, and her voice softened. "You gave him that," she whispered. "What?" Boone asked. "That steadiness." Boone didn't answer. He just pulled the blanket farther over the boy's shoulders and let him rest. Later, when Suri lay beside him, her voice brushed his shirt like breath. "Do you ever wonder why it had to be us?" "No," Boone said. "I only care that it is." For the first time in years, he wasn't trying to forget the man he had been. He was trying to become someone worth staying for. Days turned sharper as the wind swung out of the north. Frost covered brush tips at dawn. Breath hung white long after the sun lifted, and the air smelled like winter closing in. Their half-built walls held back the wind, but not the cold, so fire burned day and night. Jace began waking early, gathering kindling, shaking frost from the canvas, stirring the embers like it was his chore. No one gave him the job. He just took it. They weren't building a shelter anymore. They were building rhythm. Suri planted winter onions along the west wall, where sunlight lasted longest. "If we get through winter," she said, "the land will give back in spring." Boone scouted the ridge, finding pine for beams, ice for storage, fox dens to avoid. He hammered, patched, braced, walked, returned, but when night came, he still lay beside her. And that closeness had shifted. They no longer slept as strangers pressed by cold. No wide distance, no careful edges. Boone's arm lay beneath her neck, her hand rested across his ribs, her breath warmed the base of his jaw. It wasn't want, it wasn't obligation, it was choosing to remain near, because near meant something now. That night after supper, Boone tested the doorframe again. It stood crooked, lashed with mismatched beams, and held in place by a hinge scavenged from an old wagon axle. But it held. Inside, Jace had already fallen asleep, curled by the fire, one hand tucked beneath his cheek. Suri stepped behind Boone and wrapped her arms around his waist. "You're always working," she murmured. "Still things to be done," he replied, without turning. "I know," she whispered. "But I want to talk before the dark settles." He turned then, let her draw him back into the warmth. They sat close near the flames, knees touching. "The first night I walked into your tent," she said softly, "I thought I would have to trade myself just not to freeze." Boone's jaw went tight, but he didn't speak. "I didn't think you would let me stay without wanting something." "I remember." "But you didn't," she whispered. "Not once." "I wouldn't take anything you didn't give," Boone said. "And that's why I'm giving it now." Her hand lifted to his cheek, palm warm on stubble, eyes steady. She kissed him. Slow, certain, with the kind of clarity that comes when fear dies and choosing begins. He kissed her back. Not urgent, not claiming, just truthfully. When their foreheads rested together, she breathed. "I don't want to just survive beside you. I want to stay." "You're not going anywhere," Boone said, arms closing around her like something he had finally earned. Outside, wind slid across sagebrush, but didn't touch the warmth inside. Later, when she lay against him, and Jace curled near their feet, Boone did not reach for his rifle. Sleep came unguarded. And in the dark, right before dreams took her, Suri whispered, "You don't owe me anything, but I'm yours." He didn't answer, not with words. Sometimes love doesn't speak. It simply refuses to leave. Winter arrived slow, then heavy. Frost turned to crusted snow. Wind sharpened into iron-cold gusts. Sheets of white clung to canyon ledges until pine limbs bent beneath the weight. But the three of them stayed warm. The cabin wasn't finished, not by any settler's standard, but it stood strong. Boone reinforced the roof beams. Suri stuffed moss and reeds between wall cracks to hold heat. They dug a trench so meltwater wouldn't flood bedding. Jace stacked drywood behind the cabin in neat rows. It wasn't polished, but it held. Inside, fire never died. Blankets overlapped. Sleep was shared, without hesitation. On the third morning after the first full snowfall, Boone stepped outside, collar high, boots crunching white ground. He scanned the ridge, hoping for deer, maybe fox. Snares stayed empty, but worry didn't follow him. For the first time since the war, he felt ground beneath him that didn't shift. He heard the door creak behind him and turned. Suri stepped out wearing his old cavalry coat, sleeves dangling past her hands. She smiled. Not shy, not uncertain, just like someone who knew exactly where she belonged. Her breath drifted into the cold morning light, though her cheeks were warm from the fire, not from frost. "You checking the traps?" she asked. "Later," Boone replied. "Snow's too new. Nothing's moving yet." She stepped beside him, shoulder brushing the side of his coat. They stood there a while, staring out over the quiet canyon. "I dreamed last night," she murmured. "I was back where I came from. Same looks, same whispers, but it didn't matter anymore. I had something they never had." He glanced down at her. "And what's that?" Suri smiled a little. "A door I shut behind me. A fire I could call mine. You," Boone breathed slow, tightened his hand over hers, steady and sure. Inside the cabin, Jace shifted in his blankets. They heard him stir and call out, his voice soft and muffled. "It's morning?" "It is," Suri answered. Boone squeezed her hand one more time and stepped back inside. By midday, they were working again, side by side, like a life already settled into shape. Boone split logs behind the cabin, shoulders rolling with each swing. Suri simmered a pot of root stew thickened with dried squirrel meat. Jace sorted kindling beneath the lean-to, separating small sticks from stove stones, building order the way only children do. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs. Later, while Suri stitched one of Jace's shirts, Boone reached into his kit and unfolded a piece of scraped hide he'd worked on at night when neither of them was watching. He rubbed his thumb over the lines, then walked over and held it out. She opened it slowly. It was a nameplate, smooth leather stamped with careful letters. Suri, Jace, Reddick. She didn't speak at first, just stared at it, hands trembling a little, not from fear, but from knowing something had changed. "You can keep your name," Boone said quietly. "But if you want mine, it's yours." She set the needle aside, rose, and stepped into him. She didn't cry. She just held on, tight and sure. Jace lifted his head. "So, is she your wife now?" Boone looked down at her. "If she chooses to be." Suri didn't look away. "I already was, since the night you didn't ask anything of me." That night, they lay side by side beneath a roof Boone had built, wrapped beneath the blanket Suri had stitched, warmed by a fire Jace tended like duty, was something sacred. There was no fear now. No dread someone would come claim what they had made. Only wind outside, soft against the walls, and 3 sleepers breathing close not from need, but because they had chosen this place, this fire, this name. And when morning came, they would rise again, to build more of the life they had already begun. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening, and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours, thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances, although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development. The emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.